I was 19 years old working my first real job as a student assistant at the university library. It was a Wednesday evening during finals week, which meant the library stayed open until 2 a.m. to accommodate all the stressed-out students cramming for their exams. My shift started at 6 p.m., and I was scheduled to close that night along with 2 other student workers and 1 librarian named Mrs. Patterson. The library was massive, spanning 4 floors with countless rows of shelves, study rooms, computer labs, and quiet reading areas. Each floor had its own distinct atmosphere. The first floor was always bustling with activity. The second floor housed the media center. The third floor was dedicated to research materials, and the fourth floor was the archive section where hardly anyone ever went. That fourth floor always gave me the creeps, especially late at night when the old fluorescent lights would flicker and hum. Around 11:30 p.m., I was restocking books on the second floor when I noticed something odd. There was a man sitting at one of the computer stations wearing a heavy winter coat, which seemed strange because it was late spring and the library was always kept warm, sometimes uncomfortably so. He had the hood pulled up over his head, and he wasn't actually using the computer. He was just sitting there, staring at the blank screen. I made a mental note of it, but didn't think too much of it at the time. Students did weird things during finals week, and I figured he was just taking a break from studying. About 20 minutes later, I was pushing my cart of books toward the elevator when I saw the same man getting on the elevator heading up. I decided to take the stairs instead, something in my gut telling me to keep my distance. When I reached the third floor, I started shelving books in the history section. The third floor was almost completely empty at this hour. Most students preferred studying on the first 2 floors where there was more activity and better lighting. I was about halfway through my cart when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw the hooded man from earlier standing at the end of the aisle, maybe 30 feet away from me. He wasn't moving, just standing there facing my direction. The hood obscured most of his face, but I could see he was staring directly at me. My heart rate immediately picked up. Something about the way he stood there, completely still and silent, sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my cart and quickly pushed it toward the main area of the third floor, where there was better lighting and hopefully other people. I glanced back and saw that he had started walking in my direction, maintaining the same slow, deliberate pace. I abandoned my cart and walked briskly toward the stairs, pulling out my phone to text my coworker Sarah, who was supposed to be working the first floor circulation desk. Before I could finish typing, the library's emergency alarm system activated. A loud, piercing siren began blaring throughout the building, and red emergency lights started flashing from the ceiling. Over the intercom, Mrs. Patterson's voice came through, but she sounded panicked and out of breath. "Attention all library patrons and staff. We are initiating an emergency lockdown. Please proceed immediately to the nearest secure location and lock the doors. Do not leave your secure location until given the all clear by law enforcement. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." My blood ran cold. I spun around and saw the hooded man was now running toward me. Without thinking, I sprinted toward the group study rooms on the east side of the third floor. These rooms had solid doors with locks, unlike the open floor plan of most of the library. I could hear his footsteps pounding on the carpet behind me, getting closer. I reached the first study room and yanked the door open, diving inside and immediately slamming it shut behind me. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock, but I managed to engage the deadbolt just as the door handle started to rattle violently from the outside. The man was trying to force the door open, slamming his body against it. The door shook with each impact, and I backed away toward the far corner of the small room. Through the small rectangular window in the door, I could see him clearly now. He was a middle-aged man with wild, bloodshot eyes and several days' worth of stubble on his face. His expression was one of pure rage, and he was screaming something I couldn't make out over the alarm. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, he stopped trying to break down the door. I watched through the window as he pulled something from inside his coat. It was a large hunting knife, at least 8 inches long. He held it up to the window, making sure I saw it, and then he smiled. It was the most disturbing smile I'd ever seen. Not a smile of happiness, but one of someone who was clearly not in their right mind. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing down one of the aisles. I immediately pulled out my phone and called 911. My voice was shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. She told me that police were already en route to the library for an active threat situation and that I should remain where I was with the door locked and stay as quiet as possible. She stayed on the line with me, which provided some comfort, but I was still terrified. I could hear sirens approaching outside, and through the study room's exterior window, I could see the flashing red and blue lights of multiple police vehicles pulling into the library parking lot. The dispatcher informed me that officers were entering the building and that I should remain locked in the room until an officer made direct contact with me. Time seemed to move impossibly slow. I kept watching both the door window and the exterior window, trying to see any sign of movement. The alarm continued its relentless blaring, making it nearly impossible to hear anything else. My phone buzzed with text messages from Sarah and the other student worker, both asking if I was okay and where I was hiding. After about 15 minutes, I heard voices in the hallway. "Police, if anyone can hear me, make yourself known." I carefully approached the door and looked through the window. 2 police officers in full tactical gear were sweeping the floor with their weapons drawn. I knocked on the window, and one of them immediately came over. I unlocked the door, and they quickly escorted me downstairs and out of the building. Outside, I found Sarah, the other student worker named Marcus, and Mrs. Patterson all standing in the parking lot surrounded by police vehicles and emergency responders. Mrs. Patterson was crying and being comforted by a police officer. Sarah ran over and hugged me when she saw me. "Thank God you're okay," she said. "Did you see him?" I nodded, still too shaken to form coherent sentences. A detective came over and asked me to describe everything I had witnessed. I told him about the hooded man, how he had followed me, chased me, and shown me the knife. The detective's expression became very grave as I described the knife. He asked me to describe it in as much detail as possible, which I did. The detective then informed us that the man had been spotted on the first floor by Mrs. Patterson about 40 minutes earlier. She had noticed him behaving strangely, looking into different rooms and testing door handles. When she approached to ask if he needed assistance, he had grabbed her and threatened her, but she managed to break free and run to the administrative office where she initiated the lockdown. What made this even more disturbing was what the detective told us next. The man had apparently been living in the library for at least 3 days, hiding in the archives on the 4th floor during the day when there were more people around, and coming down at night when the library was less populated. Campus security had received reports over the past week of food missing from the staff break room and strange noises on the 4th floor, but they had attributed it to students pulling pranks during finals week. The police swept the entire building for over 2 hours before finally locating the man. He had barricaded himself in one of the 4th floor archive rooms and refused to come out. It took a negotiation team another hour to convince him to surrender peacefully. As they were escorting him out of the library in handcuffs, I got a clear look at his face. His eyes met mine for just a moment, and he smiled that same disturbing smile from earlier. We later learned from news reports that the man was a former graduate student who had been expelled from the university 3 years earlier for threatening a professor. He had apparently become obsessed with the library during his time as a student and had been planning his return for months. When police searched his makeshift living space in the archives, they found notebooks filled with detailed maps of the library, schedules of staff members, and disturbing writings that suggested he had been planning to take hostages. The university shut down the library for a full week following the incident. They installed additional security measures, including more cameras, panic buttons at all staff stations, and hired overnight security guards. They also implemented a new policy requiring all patrons to scan their university ID cards upon entry, and visitors had to sign in at the front desk. I took the rest of finals week off and seriously considered quitting my job at the library. The thought of going back to that building especially to the third and fourth floors, filled me with anxiety. But I needed the job, and I didn't want to let this incident define my life. When the library reopened, I returned to work, though I insisted on only working day shifts when there were plenty of people around. It's been 5 years since that night, and I still work at the library, though now I'm a full-time librarian rather than a student worker. I still get nervous when I have to go up to the fourth floor, and I always make sure someone knows where I am. Every time I see someone wearing a hooded sweatshirt in the library, my heart rate spikes, and I pay close attention to their behavior. That night changed me in ways I'm still processing. It taught me that danger can come from anywhere, even in places we consider safe and familiar. I was 24 years old and working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized financial firm in downtown Chicago. The company occupied the entire 15th floor of a 30-story office building that housed various businesses. It was tax season, which meant mandatory overtime for everyone in the accounting department. On this particular Thursday evening in March, I was one of 6 people from my department still working past 9 p.m. The office had a very different atmosphere after hours. During the day, it was bustling with activity, phones ringing constantly, people moving between cubicles and conference rooms, and the general hum of a busy workplace. But at night, especially late at night, the office became eerily quiet. The overhead lights would automatically dim to save energy, leaving only the lights in occupied cubicles and hallways illuminated. The silence was occasionally broken by the humming of the HVAC system or the distant ding of an elevator. I was working in my cubicle near the east side of the floor when I decided to take a break around 9:45 p.m. I walked to the break room to grab a coffee and maybe a snack from the vending machine. The break room was located on the opposite side of the floor, requiring me to walk through several rows of empty cubicles and past the darkened conference rooms. As I was making my coffee, I heard the distinct sound of the elevator doors opening, followed by footsteps in the main hallway. This wasn't particularly unusual, as people from other companies in the building often worked late and shared our floor's elevator lobby. What was unusual was that the footsteps stopped, and I didn't hear anyone entering the other offices on our floor or the elevator doors closing again. I poured some creamer into my coffee and was heading back to my cubicle when I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. At the far end of the main hallway, near the reception area, I could see a figure standing in the shadows. The security lights in that area were motion activated, but for some reason, they hadn't turned on. The person was just standing there, not moving, which explained why the lights remained off. My first thought was that it must be a colleague from another department, maybe taking a phone call or just spacing out after too many hours of work. But something fell off. The person was completely still, unnaturally still, and they seemed to be facing my direction even though I was pretty far away and in a relatively dark area myself. I decided to head back to my cubicle via an alternate route, walking along the perimeter of the office rather than through the main hallway. As I walked, I kept glancing toward where I'd seen the figure, but the angle made it impossible to see if they were still there. When I reached my cubicle, I sat down and tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. About 10 minutes later, one of my coworkers, Jessica, came by my cubicle looking worried. "Hey, did you see anyone else come onto the floor?" she asked in a low voice. I went to the printer, and I swear I saw someone walking around near the south offices, but when I looked again, no one was there. I told her about the figure I had seen by the reception area. Her face went pale. "That's weird," she said. "I'm going to check with Tom and see if maybe someone from facilities is here doing maintenance or something." Jessica walked toward Tom's cubicle, which was near mine. Tom was our senior accountant and had been with the company for over a decade. A few minutes later, both of them came back. Tom looked concerned. "I just called down to building security," he said quietly. "They said no one from facilities is scheduled to be on our floor tonight, and no one else from our company has badged in through the elevator lobby in the past 2 hours." That's when we heard it. The sound of a door closing somewhere on the floor, followed by more footsteps. These footsteps were different, though. They were faster, more purposeful, and they seemed to be moving through the office. Tom immediately pulled out his phone and called security again. "We need someone up here right now," he said, his voice tense. "There's an unauthorized person on our floor." Tom then raised his voice so the others on the floor could hear. "Everyone, grab your stuff and head to the main conference room now. Lock the door and don't open it for anyone except me or security." His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. The six of us quickly gathered in the large conference room near the center of the floor. It was one of the few rooms with a solid door and a lock. Tom locked the door behind us and turned off the lights. Through the frosted glass walls of the conference room, we could see the shadows of the cubicles and the ambient light from the exit signs, but not much else. We all sat in silence, hearts pounding, listening intently for any sound. Jessica was texting her husband. Another coworker named Marcus was on the phone with 911, and Tom was still in contact with building security. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes, we heard voices in the hallway. "This is building security. Everyone okay in there?" Tom cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole. "It's security," he confirmed and unlocked the door. 2 security guards entered, both looking serious. "We're doing a sweep of the floor," one of them said. "We need you all to stay here while we check it out. Chicago PD is on their way up as well." Over the next 30 minutes, we waited in that conference room while security guards and eventually police officers swept our entire floor. They found signs that someone had definitely been there. Several office doors that should have been locked were standing open. One of the small supply closets had been disturbed, with boxes moved around. Most disturbing was what they found in the CEO's office. Someone had been sitting at his desk and had apparently gone through his files and computer. When the police finally let us out of the conference room, they interviewed each of us about what we had seen. I described the figure by the reception area, and Jessica described the person she had seen near the south offices. The police checked the building's security camera footage and found something chilling. The cameras showed a man entering the building's lobby at 9:20 p.m. by tailgating behind an employee from another company. He then took the stairs up to the 15th floor, deliberately avoiding the elevators which would have required an access card. He wandered around our floor for nearly 40 minutes, entering various offices and looking through desks and filing cabinets. At one point, he stood in the exact spot where I had seen him, just watching and waiting. What made it even more unsettling was that the police recognized the man from the security footage. He was a former employee who had been fired from our company 6 months earlier for gross misconduct and had made threats against the company at the time of his termination. There was even a restraining order that prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of the building or contacting any company employees. The police put out an alert for his arrest, and he was apprehended 2 days later trying to enter his ex-wife's home. When they searched his apartment, they found detailed notes about our company's layout, employee schedules, and security procedures. They also found photos of several employees, including me, that he had apparently taken from social media. It became clear that he had been planning something, though to this day, I'm not entirely sure what his intentions were. The company took the incident seriously. They upgraded the entire security system, installed cameras throughout the office, hired a receptionist to monitor access even after hours, and required all employees to use a buddy system when working late. They also offered counseling services to anyone affected by the incident. I couldn't bring myself to stay late at the office for months after that night. Every shadow, every unexpected noise would send my heart racing. Even now, years later, I'm hyper-vigilant when I'm alone in the office after hours. I always make sure I know exactly who else is on the floor, and I keep my phone charged and within reach at all times. The incident taught me that the places we spend most of our time, our schools, our offices, our regular hangouts, can never be completely safe. There's always the potential for something to go wrong, for someone with bad intentions to find a way in. It's a sobering realization, but one that I think more people need to be aware of. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and never assume you're safe just because you're in a familiar place. I was 22 years old and had just graduated from college 6 months earlier. I landed a decent job at a marketing agency in Atlanta and was living in a small apartment downtown. The apartment building had underground parking, which was one of the main reasons I chose to live there. As a young woman living alone in a big city, having secure parking was important to me. The parking garage had 3 levels, each accessible by a ramp and also by elevator. My assigned spot was on the lowest level, P3, which was the most inconvenient, but also the cheapest. The garage was well lit and had security cameras, which gave me a sense of security, though I always try to park as close to the elevator as possible. It was a Friday night in late October, and I was coming home from dinner with friends around 10:30 p.m. I had parked on P3 that morning before work, so I took the elevator down from the street level. The elevator doors opened onto the dimly lit parking level, and I immediately noticed how quiet it was. Usually, there were at least a few other residents coming and going, but tonight the garage seemed completely deserted. I walked toward my car, which was parked about 5 spots away from the elevator. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls and ceiling, and I found myself walking faster than normal. Just as I reached my car and was unlocking it with my key fob, I heard a vehicle enter the parking level from the ramp. I glanced over and saw a dark-colored van driving slowly through the garage, as if the driver was looking for a parking spot. What struck me as odd was that there were plenty of empty spots near the entrance to P3, but the van kept driving deeper into the level, heading in my direction. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. Through my rearview mirror, I watched as the van pulled into a spot 3 spaces behind me, even though there were numerous closer spots available. The van's engine shut off, but no one got out. I could see the silhouette of the driver through the van's windshield, and it appeared they were just sitting there. My instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. I put my car in reverse, deciding I would just leave and come back later or park on a different level. As I started backing out of my spot, the van's door suddenly opened and a man jumped out. He was tall, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He started walking quickly toward my car, one hand reaching into his jacket pocket. I immediately hit the gas, backing up faster than I normally would, and then shifted into drive. The man broke into a run, now heading straight for my driver's side door. I accelerated toward the exit ramp, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the sound of my engine. In my rearview mirror, I could see the man had stopped running and was now walking back toward his van. I drove up the ramp to P2, found a spot near the elevator, and immediately called 911. The dispatcher told me to stay in my locked car with the engine running until an officer arrived. While I waited, I called the building's security office and told them what had happened. The security guard on duty said he would check the garage cameras and meet the police when they arrived. 2 police officers arrived about 10 minutes later. I met them in the garage and explained everything that had happened. We walked down to P3, and I showed them where my original parking spot was and where the van had been parked. The van was gone. The police and building security reviewed the parking garage camera footage together, and what they found was deeply disturbing. The van had entered the garage shortly after I did, and had been circling through all 3 parking levels for nearly 15 minutes before finally following me down to P3. The cameras captured the man jumping out of the van and running toward my car, and you could clearly see him reaching into his jacket for something. What was even more concerning was that this same van had been spotted in the garage on 3 previous occasions over the past 2 weeks, always late at night, and always lingering longer than normal. The security guard mentioned that another female resident had reported a similar experience about 10 days earlier, but hadn't filed a police report because the man hadn't actually approached her car. The police ran the van's license plate from the camera footage and discovered that the plates were stolen. They put out an alert for the vehicle and increased patrols in the area. They also advised me to change my parking spot to a higher level closer to the main entrance and to always be aware of my surroundings when entering or exiting the garage. For the next 2 weeks, I was a nervous wreck every time I had to go to or from my car. I started carrying pepper spray on my keychain, and I would call a friend and stay on the phone with them while I walked through the garage. I also began varying my routine, sometimes parking on different levels and coming and going at different times. Then, about 3 weeks after my encounter, I got a call from the police detective who had been assigned to my case. They had arrested the man who owned the van. He had been caught attempting to abduct a woman from a shopping mall parking lot in a nearby suburb. When they searched his van, they found zip ties, duct tape, rope, and other items that suggested he had been planning abductions. The detective told me that after his arrest, the man had been linked to at least 4 other attempted abductions in the Atlanta area over the past 6 months. He would target women who appear to be alone, follow them to parking garages or isolated parking lots, and then attempt to grab them when they were getting into or out of their vehicles. I had been lucky. My quick reaction and decision to drive away immediately had likely saved me from becoming his next victim. The detective also informed me that when police searched the man's apartment, they found photos and notes about several women, including some who lived in my apartment building. He had apparently been stalking potential victims for weeks or even months before making his move. The level of planning and premeditation was chilling. After that case was resolved and the man was in custody facing multiple felony charges, I still couldn't shake the fear. I ended up breaking my lease and moving to a different apartment building in a different part of town, one with above-ground parking and 24-hour security. The financial penalty for breaking the lease was significant, but my peace of mind was worth it. I also started taking self-defense classes and became much more aware of personal safety practices. I learned about predatory behavior patterns, how to be aware of my surroundings without appearing paranoid, and what to do in various dangerous situations. These classes made me feel more empowered and less like a potential victim. Looking back on that night now, several years later, I realize how close I came to disaster. If I hadn't trusted my instincts when I saw that van approaching, if I had hesitated even a few seconds longer, or if I had tried to confront the man instead of fleeing, things could have ended very differently. That experience fundamentally changed how I view personal safety and the importance of trusting your gut feelings when something doesn't feel right. I share my story whenever I can, especially with other young women who might be living alone for the first time. It's not about living in fear or becoming paranoid. It's about being aware, being prepared, and understanding that predators often target people in places we consider safe, like our own apartment building's parking garage. They count on us being complacent, distracted, or too polite to take evasive action when something feels wrong. The most important lesson I learned is this: your safety is more important than being polite or worrying about looking silly. If something or someone makes you uncomfortable, trust that feeling and take action. Don't wait to see if your concerns are justified. Don't worry about offending someone or causing a scene. Your instincts exist for a reason, and they've been honed by millions of years of evolution to keep you safe.